Well, welcome to the very first Gareth A. Davies Fight Talk. And I am deeply honored, deeply privileged, because one of my great friends and one of the great broadcasters in the sports world joins us on the show. It's the greatest newsbreaker in mixed martial arts,
Wow.
period. No, oh,
Wow.
yeah. And now a very esteemed journalist and broadcaster with ESPN. I've seen him from young man to older man to father to the great figure, the cultured, coutured figure you've now become in sports broadcasting. Ariel Helwani!
Wow. What an introduction. Gareth, it's great to be on now. I think your 45th different podcast. What an honor this is. Every week you launch a new one, but I feel the exact same way about you. You know this. And it's always great to talk to you. So thank you for having me. As your first guest, you said I could have had anyone. You said you could have had Bob Arum, Mike Tyson, Lennox Lewis, anyone, but you wanted Helwani. What a great honor.
Johnny Omega, Brock Lesnar wanted to come on.
Yeah.
The Rock, Tyson Fury, but I wanted Helwani or Ariel Helwani. Ariel, listen, it's been a huge week for the UFC. You cover everything in MMA. How big is it that Francis Ngannou put the lights out of Stipe Miocic last week in Las Vegas? 3 African champions now. But for the UFC, the heavyweight title held by Francis Ngannou, it was a very popular victory, wasn't it?
Yes, it's potentially massive. And I only say potentially because we've seen in mixed martial arts a big moment, a big win. And then, we start celebrating the beginning, the dawn of a new era. And then the era kind of fizzles out relatively quickly. We did that with Lyoto Machida back in the day, but this is completely different. This is the closest that the UFC has ever had to Mike Tyson. They have never had a heavyweight champion who suspends disbelief quite like Francis Ngannou. They've never had one that has this power and this presence and like the knockouts and the quick fights. The difference between him and Mike Tyson is that when Mike Tyson became a star, when he became heavyweight champ, even at a young age, it felt like he was somewhat of a finished product. With Francis, it still feels like he's scratching the surface. Like maybe in 2-3 years, we'll see the finished product that is Francis Ngannou. That's a scary, scary thought. And so, yes, 3rd African champion, heavyweight champ, the knockouts, all that stuff is great. But just think about the UFC now promoting a beast like Francis Ngannou, a specimen like Ngannou, a very smart, introspective, thoughtful guy who then goes out and hits people like he's a Mack truck. The guy is just amazing. So I would imagine the UFC is very excited. And now, obviously, the big question is, who does he fight next? Who does he fight in his first title defense? But this is a great problem to have. He is a promoter's dream. And so I'm really curious to see what they do with him.
Well, the narrative of his life is extraordinary as well, because he's just as interesting as Mike Tyson's was. You mentioned him there.
Yeah.
How, he was the self-styled baddest man on the planet. These extraordinary backstories of growing up on the streets and in gangs and all these kind of things, and drugs and prostitution around him. But Francis, just the similar kind of story, but he's not the baddest man on the planet in the way he purports and carries himself and purport. So it's just as extraordinary a story. The obvious question is it Francis Ngannou, Jon Jones super fight next?
Yeah. It should be. It would be a travesty with a capital T if it's not. This would be one of the biggest heavyweight fights in UFC history, one of the biggest title fights, period, in UFC history. But it's somewhat deja vu all over again, because we were in this spot last spring and summer where Jon Jones flirted with the idea of going up, but said he wanted more money, and it kind of fizzled out. Now the stakes are even higher because Ngannou is the heavyweight champion. So could you imagine Jon Jones? Like, if I was the promoter of the UFC, if I was the president of the UFC, first of all, Jon Jones relinquishes the light heavyweight title last spring, late spring, early summer. From that moment, we knew that he was fighting either Stipe Miocic or Francis Ngannou next. That was the plan. From that moment, I start working on Jon Jones's next fight. I make a deal for Stipe. I make a deal for Francis. The fact that they have no deal in place now as Francis is the champion blows my mind. They should have had a deal in place to the point where they steal a page from what Eddie Hearn just did with Canelo Alvarez. Canelo fights, match is over, go to the big screen, fade to black, and there's the Billy Joe Saunders promo. They should have had a promo ready for August, September, Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou. This should have been a done deal by now.
You could have had Jon Jones in Las Vegas stepping into the octagon.
So many things. Like we knew this 9 months in advance. Why are they waiting now? So the one thing, if this was last year, I would say they're probably not going to make a deal. Because look, if you look at the last year in the UFC, they haven't had to sell tickets, right? All the pay-per-views, all the shows have been at the Apex. And they were finalizing pay-per-view cards 2, 3, 4 days before the show. All they cared about were the pay-per-view sales. Now, times are different. So back then, they didn't really have a strong desire to make these big money fights. It's no coincidence, Gareth. Conor didn't fight for the entire 2020 pandemic, right? He fought in January, and then he returned the following January once there were fans. Nathan Diaz didn't fight. Jon Jones didn't fight. Jorge Masvidal got a fight on 1 week's notice because they had to save the card in Abu Dhabi. Like the biggest stars of the UFC, a lot of them did not fight, and that's because they didn't feel like they had to break the bank. Oh, wow. Now they go to Jacksonville, UFC 261, April 24th. Let's take Usman Masvidal, which was scheduled for the fall. Let's put on that card because we have to sell tickets. Oh, May 15th. We need to sell tickets in Houston. Call up Nate Diaz a month and a half out. So I think because they're trying to sell tickets, still in the pandemic, trying to get people out of the house, there is more of an onus on them to try to make this fight happen. If this was last year, empty arena, they'll be like, you know what, John, thanks for your time. We're going to Derek Lewis. Ultimately, I don't know if it happens. It should happen, but I think there's a greater chance of it happening now that they're fighting in front of packed crowds as opposed to last year when they were fighting in empty arena.
So you're saying that they could maybe do Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou in, say, July, August in AT&T Stadium, Arlington, Texas, or somewhere like that with 60,000 crowd? Would that
for some reason, Dana doesn't seem to love the idea of the outdoor stadium or the stadium that's 50% full. Like he wants to go full capacity in Florida or Texas right now. I think they're hoping that July 10th is going to be Conor McGregor versus Dustin Poirier 3. I'm told they're close to finalizing that. I think they're hoping that that would happen in Las Vegas and that there will be fans allowed. And so if you have that fight, you don't need Francis versus Jon on that card. But then August, September, that would be the dream. That would be what they want.
It's a weird one because Jones will have been out for an inordinately long time by then as well, won't he? You know?
Yes. I mean, it would be February of last year since he last fought. Here's what I think is going on with Jon Jones. Jon Jones knows what's up. He knows that his last 3 fights were a little too close for comfort. And he didn't fight the best of the best. He fought Anthony Smith, great fighter. He fought Thiago Santos, great fighter. He fought Dominic Reyes, who I think he lost to. And I think he realizes, look, I am mortal. You don't agree with that?
I think he just pipped that fight.
3-2, I thought of Dominic Reyes, but it was close, right? It was super close. Jon Jones of 8 years ago is not fighting that.
He would have smoked him,
exactly. And so I think he realizes I am mortal. What do I have to show for my career? What do I have to show for being arguably the greatest of all time, certainly the greatest light heavyweight champion of all time? I want to get paid. So if you want me to go up and fight that guy, who, by the way, I don't think Jon Jones is scared of Francis. I just think he's trying to be a businessman. I would urge Jon Jones to, as much fun as it is for you and I and the media and the fans, stop tweeting about the negotiations. This doesn't bode well. They don't like when you do this. You have to know who you're negotiating with. Stop doing this because it's not going to end well for you because the UFC doesn't want to seem like they lost to Jon Jones. They don't want to seem like he is dictating the narrative of this negotiation. And so I would urge him to stop. That would be my advice. But I don't begrudge Jon Jones for trying to make this money because how many big paydays does he have left at this point?
You want him to have a big payday, but I mean, it's great to read stuff on Twitter and enjoy the hubbub for the fans, but it's not the place for people to be, I don't think, for Jon Jones to be saying, I want at least 10 million or, it just doesn't
Especially
work.
With the
it's
UFC brass.
Dirty linen in public, in my view.
Yeah.
Get the fight done. Get the big figures done. I think he does deserve a massive payday. I'm not sure about his body at 245 pounds, however. Yeah. It's a lot more weight.
I agree.
Speed, all those things. Ngannou flexing with a little finger, it could be all over. That's the excitement of this, to be honest.
Sure, and I think he recognizes that. Now, again, I'm not saying he's afraid. He vacated the title knowing that next was either Stipe or Francis. It's not a surprise. And Francis was the betting favorite. I just think he recognizes, and rightly so, this is a big fight. and I deserve a lot of money for a big fight. Now, what is that number? He says 8 to 10 million is too low. I would say historically, the UFC is not paying anyone other than Conor McGregor north of 10 million. And historically,
Nurmagomedov as well.
yeah, he made around the 10 million, but also he was getting paid some from the Abu Dhabi government, right? Like when he's fighting in the United States, he's not making that. And so, yeah, okay, there's two guys. Now, does Jon Jones deserve to be in that conversation? Yes. From a pay-per-view draw standpoint, historically, he has never been a massive draw without Daniel Cormier. The rivalry helped sell things. But I'm not here to say he doesn't deserve it, because he does. The body of work speaks for itself.
Number one pound for pound of all time?
It depends. Are we talking?
Is Jones that man?
I have two lists. I have one where PEDs are allowed and one where PEDs aren't allowed.
Okay.
I mean, the facts are, he was caught multiple times.
Is he top of the PED one though?
Yes, top of the PED one, no question. If we want to have a list where everyone's included, PED or not PED, yes, he is number one, no questions asked. If you want to have a non-PED list where you want to be included in this list, you have not failed a single drug test, GSP for me is number one, Khabib is number two.
Cool. So what you were saying there was he does deserve a massive payday. I agree with you, and it has to be right. But like you say, everything stacks up. What doesn't stack up is why the UFC and Jon Jones aren't getting on and just getting the thing signed. That's what doesn't stack up.
Yeah, or to me, why didn't they do this in December, in November?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why didn't they get this done beforehand so that we didn't have to go through this all over again? Because guess what? We just went through this, and all it does is turn off some of the fans. Look, in the midst of the pandemic, no one wants to hear anyone say 8 to 10 million is not enough, right? No one wants to hear that. It's hard to sympathize. It's hard to relate to something like that, even though he actually deserves that kind of money because of the time and the fights that he has delivered for the UFC. I think that they will try to make it happen. Ultimately, it's impossible to know. And guess what? They have a pretty good plan B, nowhere near the kind of fight that Jones versus Ngannou would be. But a Derek Lewis rematch, even though the first fight was a complete dud, I think is an easy sell for the public right now.
I hope that fight gets made. I really do. Moving on to, you cover all things MMA. So next weekend, or this weekend rather, on a Friday night, we've got it over here on the BBC iPlayer in the UK, which is a big deal, free to 70 million people, but it's also on Showtime, is Bellator now, making a big surge with CBS and Viacom. Tremendous 8-man light heavyweight tournament. Looks really exciting. Some great matchups in that. Yoel Romero against Rumble Johnson. Corey Anderson against Yakshi Miradov, who's the dark horse. I know I managed... Dovechin Yakshimuradov, one of the most difficult names I think I've ever had to say, but I've been practicing it for hours before we came on air. Some great fights. Phil Davis rematch with Vadim Nemkov for the title this time. Ryan Bader, Lyoto Machida, 9 years on from Machida, spangled his eyes in Los Angeles when he was bull rushing the Brazilian, got caught by a short right hand in the UFC. Is it a good move for Bellator? You'll ask me about here in the iPlayer and the BBC. It's a brilliant move. Is it a good move for them to move on to Showtime? And are they, with this tournament, really showing something?
Well, I think there's a rich history of MMA on Showtime dating back to Elite XC and then Strikeforce, of course. Scott Coker has the relationship with the people in charge over there. Showtime, obviously, we know about their rich history in boxing. To me, once Spike TV became Paramount, it felt very out of place on Paramount. It felt like they didn't have a home. It felt like all the programming was going in a different direction than what it was on Spike. And they were kind of, the redheaded stepchild. Moving to CBS Sports Network made a little more sense, but a lot of people aren't watching that. It's kind of tucked away. It's hard to find here in the States. And so I feel like this is a natural fit. You pair it with boxing, you have the history, all that stuff and more. And so, yes, I'm curious. Friday, I think, is better than Thursdays for them. They were kind of getting lost in the shuffle. And I like the fact that they've made some signings. They've tried to freshen things up. Look, what helped Strikeforce back in the day while they were on Showtime was they had the women's division, and the UFC didn't have the women's division. And that was their thing that kind of separated them from the UFC. Well, the thing that Bellator can use now to separate them from the UFC are these tournaments, because the UFC doesn't do tournaments, at least not officially. And so I like that they do this. Some of them have dragged on a little too long. The current featherweight one dragging on, but it was in the midst of pandemic, so you give them a pass on that. They've gone, 8 great light heavyweights. And most importantly, I love that they're doing Romero Rumble right off the bat. Don't save it. Learn from the past. When you try to save it, it never comes to fruition. Give the fans the fight that they want. And by the way, I would argue, as far as like announcements go, I don't recall a Bellator fight announcement garnering this much excitement when it was announced. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out.
Me too. And it's a delight for me to be working with the BBC iPlayer on that. I think it's enormous for MMA here. One of the things, I covered UFC here on TV years ago as well. It wasn't always in the same place. And once it is all in one place, it helps the fans and it helps the new fans in a new territory because it's got canonical ownership of those broadcasts so that you know where to go all the time. It's not a little bit over here and a little bit over there. But it's great news for the sport in Europe to have it on the BBC iPlayer. And as you say, Bellator kind of expanding and drawing more attention with their tournaments all the time. 2 more things tonight, Ariel. Well, 3 actually. Nate Diaz back. I mean, he loves you. The Diaz brothers have been putting the homie on you for years, as they do. You know what happened with me when Nate was due to see me in California and I went on a road trip like Hunter S. Thompson all over the place. Nate stoned over here, Nick stoned over there. Can't find AJ Agazarm. Run into Rudy Hernandez, is it? Rudy?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing guys. I love the Diaz brothers. They bring a sprinkling of mystique and bizarreness and surrealism to our sport.
Yeah, it's great.
And the fact that Nate Diaz is now fighting Leon Edwards, who I consider, 2.5 weeks ago, he sticks his finger in Belal Muhammad's eye, and he doesn't progress. But I think this is real progress. This is surely a title eliminator fight for the winner of Kamaru Usman and Jorge Masvidal.
Yes. And so Leon Edwards has been one of the unluckiest fighters in the UFC. So it's really nice to see him get this big time fight that people are excited about because he certainly deserves it. A few years ago, I came up with this term, the people's main event. This is the people's main event on May 15th. All due respect to Michael Chandler and Charles Oliveira, who are tremendous fighters fighting for a vacant lightweight title. This is the one that is going to pop the crowd and going to sell a lot of those tickets in Houston. And it's quintessential Diaz, right? He creates a title out of nothing, the BMF title that all of a sudden draws the likes of The Rock and the president, sells out Madison Square Garden. And now he's fighting in the first 5-round non-title fight co-main event in UFC history. The man makes history. And sometimes it almost feels like he does it accidentally. It's a great thing. He doesn't get enough credit for how smart and how shrewd he is.
But he and Nick, the reason why I think what happens in MMA, and this is a generic thing, authenticity is really enjoyed over a period of time. If you have any longevity of authenticity in the sport, as a fighter, as a personality, as whatever, people appreciate it in the sport because people know the sport inside out. They know when people are genuine. He's a genuine jiu-jitsu liver. He's a genuine pot smoker. He's a genuine guy. I remember telling him once, no, I'm not going to say what I said to him, but because it's too extreme for this first show, but he got the language, he got the language. They are top guys. I mean, Leon Edwards, for me, Darren Till's brilliant. There's some other great fighters in the UK. Conor McGregor's there, of course. But British-wise, I think he's the top pound for pound. I think
right now, yeah.
Pound for pound.
I don't know how you argue that. Yeah, I agree. He was looking great against Belal Muhammad. I mean, and this is a guy who had not fought in about a year, right? No, over a year. Excuse me. He was last scheduled to fight in March of 2020, but his previous fight was July of 2019. I thought he looked to be in phenomenal shape. He was on point, and it was just really unfortunate what happened. So this is a tough fight. By the way, give Nate a lot of credit. I mean, he could have fought the Robbie Lawlers of the world at this point. He's fighting arguably number 2 or number 3 best welterweight on the planet, right? You can argue Colby Covington and all that stuff, but there's no denying Leon is number 2 or number 3 best welterweight on the planet. So I give Nathan a lot of credit for that. It's a huge fight. You mentioned a potential title eliminator. I'm curious to see what happens with Colby, because they tried to do Leon Edwards versus Colby Covington. Colby didn't want the fight. And I think what Colby is thinking at this point, well, the title is being defended April 24th. Let me just hold out like Masvidal did, and I'll fight the winner of that fight, because Colby versus Jorge, massive. Colby versus Usman 2, pretty big as well. The first fight was great. And so I suspect that he's hoping that they'll give him the winner of that fight. Then what happens to Leon if he wins on May 15th? Does he have to fight again? That would be now 10 in a row unbeaten for the guy. I don't know. But yes, this is the high profile fight that he's been looking for. And I'm really happy for him. And I'm happy to see Nate back, because like you said, anytime the Diaz brothers are fighting, it feels like everything is just a little more fun, a little more exciting.
You are always on it. Always on it. And I love that. No, the nice thing is that, or the great thing is for the fans, that a great summer is spring into summer is starting to pan out now. If they can get that Ngannou Jones fight sealed, or even I would happily see Ngannou and Derek Lewis fight again, by the way, because I was there, and when they fought the first time, and they were, their hands were strapped back. It was 19 strikes in 15 minutes or something, wasn't it, between them? Honestly, I was praying that they didn't throw a single punch in that last round, because
it was the most terrifying, boring fight in history, right? Like, you couldn't look away at any point.
Absolutely. But so to see those two actually go at it now in a title fight, and I think Derek Lewis has earned his tilt at the title as well, definitely. And like you say, there is, I don't know if we go into round 4 with those two in this one. It's more like we wake out of a nightmare and into reality for round 4, maybe. But final thing before I let you go, gaze into your crystal ball for a moment. You will have thought about this before, especially given the amount of research into brain injuries and trauma that fighters have and all those things. And I've been thinking about this a lot during lockdown, because things have slowed and you can let the gears go and just, freewheel. Do you think there'll be professional fighting in 100 years' time?
Oh, wow. What a question. I will say yes.
It's a big question, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a tough question.
Yeah,
God.
Yeah.
I will say yes, maybe with different regulations and limitations, but it has been a part of our culture for the past 100 years. And of course, a lot more is known. There's a lot more research, as you said, about the trauma that these men and women take. And I suspect, as far as MMA is concerned, we're about to learn a lot more over the next few years. We're still in the embryonic stages of this sport. Correct. But yes, I will say yes. I think, and that's not me sort of, hoping. That's me knowing that there will always be fighting. It will always appeal to people. It will always be of great interest to a certain section of society. And so I will say yes, although it's a tough freaking question. Jeez. I mean,
it is. No, we celebrate what we do, though. Because you and I are around these people all the time, we celebrate the warrior spirit, don't we? Because it can be channeled into so many good things, so many beautiful things. That a lot of the people we're involved with, they become better people. The coaches we talk to, their objective is to make them better fighters and better people. So we're in a very fortunate industry. It's a niche industry, and it's very, very young and evolving, but it's incredible, isn't it, Ariel, the journey?
I feel so blessed, so blessed. I have so much respect and admiration for these fighters. And of course, you try to cover them objectively and fairly and critically, but they possess something within their souls that I could never dream of possessing. To step into a cage or a ring with 4-ounce gloves or 8-ounce gloves, 10-ounce, like, it's crazy to me, right? Especially what the MMA fighters do with just 4-ounce, a cup, shorts, no shoes. I mean, it's unfathomable. And so I've always tried to be very respectful. Look, there are fighters who don't like me or who I don't think too highly of, but at the end of the day, I always try to be respectful, because my favorite part of this job, I love the fights. I mean, what better experience, what better privilege than being in Las Vegas or London or anywhere in the world, 20,000 people, and you have a front row seat to some of the greatest action known to mankind. But for me, what keeps me coming back for more, what keeps me excited to do this job are the fighters, speaking to them, learning about them, learning what their reason, their raison d'être is. You know what I'm saying? Francis Ngannou, learning about Francis's story and what this man has overcome, and being homeless. Like, well, you don't get stories like that in other sports, quite frankly. And so I'm sometimes I get emotional, Gareth, after my shows talking to the fighters, and I'm like, wow, I'm so thankful that these people opened up to me because they're so interesting, and it's such a privilege to get these kinds of stories from these men and women. And so I hope that feeling never goes away, because I still feel the same way about the fighters as I did when I started, 14 or so years ago.
Absolutely, and I feel inspired by them as well. It's been an inspiring conversation with you today. Thank you so much for joining me on my very first show.
No problem. And just for the Venmo, PayPal, you could just make it out to, Ariel Helwani. All good. Thank you,
My
Gareth.
agent will be in touch with your agent. Thank you very much, sir, and good night.
Thank you.